Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Lockdown. So what Lockdown's essentially about is we center on this married couple. We have Linda and Paxton, and they have been struggling for a while. They really are not in a great spot in their marriage, but also recently the COVID-19 pandemic has arisen, and it's forced both of them into quarantine, where they hope to resolve their differences, but obviously they're very bored in what they're doing. So one day, Linda decides to devise this plan where they're going to pull off this jewel heist of sorts that can only be done during a pandemic, in hopes of maybe reconnecting in that way. So Lockdown overall, I was really not excited for this film. I've already expressed my discontent when it comes to COVID films. I just don't really know why they need to be a thing. I don't think this is something that Hollywood should capitalize on, especially during the pandemic. I think that is just a woefully miscalculated decision and just a really dumb thing to do. And I don't really understand why Hollywood has this need to do this all of a sudden. It didn't work with Songbird, and especially with how much I hated that film, I was really not looking forward to this one at all. It didn't look terrible or anything, but just knowing that it was a thing that did not have me all that excited. Let me say, I don't have a problem with people making movies during COVID. I mean, I think one of the best things, one of the best ways to heal during this difficult time is recreational things like that, is, doing things that give you a passion, doing things that, are something that makes you happy, and writing makes a lot of people happy. It's very therapeutic for people. So I don't have a problem with, say, the movie Malcolm and Marie that's coming out. I don't have a problem with that at all. What I do have a problem with is movies that are solely focused around COVID and, implement COVID into their story, where it feels like this is a movie that was probably already a thing, and because of the fact that Doug Liman was, bored, he decided to just go ahead and add COVID into the story, even if it didn't really benefit him to do so. So that's what I always had a real issue with. But I was hoping that maybe it could be something special, and so I've seen it, and it's not terrible. I'll say that. Lockdown is not a terrible movie, but it basically is what you would expect from a film that is only able to do so much during a pandemic. This is a very generic and I think very low effort comedy that I actually do think could have been a lot more had they been able to do other things with it, and be able to make it, not during the midst of a pandemic. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. I'll say right off the bat, that is easily, I think, the best thing about this entire movie. All the acting here is really good. Everyone does do a really good job, but especially when it comes to our main two actors, Anne Hathaway and Chiwetel Ejiofor, are both really good here. They have a really solid chemistry. They work very well together. They're very likable in their roles. Chiwetel Ejiofor especially, he's always someone that gives it 100% in pretty much everything, and that's really no different here. Paxton as a character we'll get into a little bit, but Ejiofor is very likable. You find yourself really gravitating towards him. I think a lot of people might even relate to the struggles of his character because the way that Ejiofor portrays this role, and I really like what he ended up doing here. And like I said, I think their chemistry is really good. These two do work very well together, and I would like to see them in a better movie at some point, because I do think that they have a lot of potential as a pairing. I think they could work they work very well together, and I definitely would like to see them working in a better movie at some point for sure. But getting into the directing and the writing here, now we get to the things that I think definitely do bring down this film. Doug Liman's directing here is not really a huge issue. I don't think the way that he portrays this movie is wrong. I think that clearly he wanted this to be like a lighthearted, sort of adventure, and for the most part that's what it is. I just feel like there's more that he could have done with it style-wise, and it feels like he's kind of robbed of creative freedom here. It almost feels like there's more he wanted to do with this that he just didn't really get to, and I actually would have liked it if he did something that's a little bit more lower budget, and he clearly is. This is definitely a lower budget film, but I do think it kind of hurts him a bit. But Doug Liman, make no mistake, is a fantastic director, and he still does do a good job in directing this film. It's clear what he's trying to do here. He's trying to tell this story of a couple that, is really trying to search for connection. They're trying to reconnect in that way. They're forced to do things that they don't necessarily want to have to do, and I think he does a good job with the directing here. What really brings this film down is its screenplay, and I'm sorry to say it's 100% Stephen Knight's fault. I mean, that's why this film really isn't that great, and it sucks because I do think Stephen Knight has done some legitimately good stuff. I mean, he's the guy who did Locke, which, I really love that film a lot, and I think what actually worked so well about that film was the simplicity of it all. It being a guy in a car, and all the conversations, being over a radio and things like that. And here, he just can't recapture that same magic. It feels like we're working with so little in this movie. I already talked about how Anne Hathaway and Chiwetel Ejiofor are very likable in their roles, but their characters, that's a different story. There really isn't much to either of them in this film. I mean, we know that Anne Hathaway, she works as in some kind of like department stores. She's a CEO there, and she's had to make some like really tough decisions. She's kind of disgruntled over the fact that there's things that she can't do, and you can see that that is something that is legitimately annoying her. She doesn't really it bothers her a lot in this movie, and you can see that's something that is very much like annoying her throughout this film. And then Chiwetel Ejiofor's character Paxton, he's someone that is this poet. He loves to tell poetry. It's something that matters a lot to him. He loves telling poetry to his neighbors, but he also is having a lot of trouble with getting jobs and things like that. And we can see that he's not very happy with how his life has turned out. The problem is, because of the fact that the film is made during COVID, we're told basically everything. None of this were actually shown. It's very much just kind of told to us, and it's not told in an interesting way. A lot of it is done through exposition, and it feels like if they had given more time, we could have actually gotten a chance to get to know these characters more, but the film never really gives us a chance to do that. For example, Linda as a character, we don't really know a lot of what she's struggling with, besides the fact that she clearly is just annoyed with Paxton. They're not connecting in the way that they really used to. But there's a moment in the movie where she has to make this really hard decision and fire some workers, and you can tell that this is something that she doesn't really want to do, but it never really feels like she expresses remorse for that. It never really feels like this is nagging at her. The idea of, and I'm sure this is something that a lot of people relate to, the idea of, having to get rid of people in a specific position that are good, but you just can't really pay them anymore, and so you have to, cut your losses. And it just never really feels like this is something that she references ever again. And that's really, I think, the biggest thing with this movie, is that it just feels too small in that way. There's so many things that just kind of happen and they're never really brought up again. Paxton, for example, we're told in this movie that he is an ex-convict. He's gone to jail, and so he's been struggling with jobs for a while, but you never really feel like this is that big of a deal. And you would think that it's because of COVID that he is this way, that's why he isn't able to get all of these jobs. But no, it's because he's an ex-convict and he's been struggling with employment for a while. So you can see that these characters, they seem pretty unaffected by COVID, which kind of begs the question, why even center this movie around COVID? And it's probably because of the fact that, aside from that, they don't really know what to do with this story. A lot of this film are just their long, drawn-out monologues of Anne Hathaway and Chiwetel Ejiofor just like going at each other, but it goes on forever. There's so many scenes that are around like 5 or 6 minutes long, and there's really nothing happening. It's very easy to check out of this movie as a result, and I can very much see why people would be very bored by this. In fact, there were moments where I myself was very bored by what was going on. It also doesn't help that like half of this movie are literal Zoom conversations where Anne Hathaway is on Zoom with other characters, and it's not funny or compelling or anything like that. She's talking to them on Zoom, and it feels like this is something that wasn't supposed to be done in the way that it was. And what I mean by that is that you can take COVID out of this movie and I think you have a much better movie as a result, because the film is so intent on making COVID the joke in this movie. Every COVID joke you can think of is in here. Oh, someone's Zoom connection is not that great. Oh, Anne Hathaway is like freezing up, or she's lagging, and what are we gonna do to improvise it? And it feels like that's something that was like not even scripted. Like, it feels like they were having issues with Zoom connectivity, and so they made this joke because they thought it'd be funny. Or, oh, there's no toilet paper, what are we gonna do about that? Why do we have to wear a mask? Just every single COVID joke that you can think of is in this movie, and none of them are funny, mainly because we've heard these jokes for months now, and the film doesn't do anything fresh or new with it, and I think that's what really does hurt the film. I think what the movie really need to focus more on is seeing these two characters that are not really connecting all that well, and basically place them in this environment together where they have to reconnect. They have to recall the things that they like most about each other. They have to tolerate the things that bother them about each other. But the film never really focuses on that as much as it should. It's much more focused on other things that just aren't really important at all. The relationship itself, it just doesn't feel like it gets the proper time that it really does need, and that's really weird considering that's what this entire movie's supposed to be about, right? Like, they don't really do a good job with focusing on their relationship. But the other thing that you might notice is that there's a lot of actors in this movie. I've only talked about Anne Hathaway and Chiwetel Ejiofor. How is everyone else? Well, the reason I didn't really discuss them in terms of performances is that they really don't have that much to do in this movie. It really just feels like Doug Liman, wrangled up the actors that he could because he needed a star-studded cast, but he didn't know what to do with really any of them. I mean, yes, actresses like Mindy Kaling pop up, and Ben Stiller pops up. He's Linda's boss in the movie, but that's all he kind of does. He doesn't really have anything significant. Ben Kingsley also pops up, but he doesn't really have anything that's significant either. The only characters that have something legitimately significant are Jasmine Simon and Jewel Hill, who, that's Paxton's half-brother and his wife, and they're kind of going through their own thing, but we never really get to dive deep into it because it's all done over Zoom. We never actually see these characters, so that very much does hurt the movie. Or it's Mark Gaddis's character, who you think for a little bit isn't really going to be that integral, but then they bring him back, and again, they don't really do much of anything with him. So again, the film doesn't seem to know what to do with any of these characters besides our main two, and it feels like they really could have cut out a fraction of these characters because they don't really have much of an impact on the movie at all, and I think that definitely does hurt the film for sure. But the other thing to talk about is the heist aspect of the film. A lot of people are going to think that, and that was the thing that kept me interested in this movie, is that, oh, this is trying to be something different. It's like a heist movie. This is not a heist movie in really any way. In fact, the heist itself does not come into fruition until literally the last 30 minutes of this movie. And I will just tell you right now, that heist is so deathly uninteresting. There are no obstacles that get in the way. There are no people that try to stop them with this. They just kind of pull off the heist without a hitch, and that's really kind of it. You honestly could remove the heist from the movie entirely. I don't really know what it's even doing here. It feels like it's just something that Lyman came up with because he felt the rest of the movie wasn't interesting. Knight came up with because he felt the rest of the movie wasn't interesting enough, and I don't really know why. I don't think that the heist adds really anything to the movie, especially because, like a lot of things, it's not really brought up again after it happens. They just kind of do it, and then that's it, and it just didn't really need to be there. I think the focus of the movie was completely wrong. Again, I think it really just should have been on these two characters and them reconnecting in that way, but the film never really puts the focus on what it should, and so as a result, the screenplay is just so uninteresting throughout this entire movie, and I think it really does bring it down. And like I said, the comedy just does not work here either. There's a running gag with Chiwetel Ejiofor that just really gets old after a while. It involves a writer of sorts that he really admires, and it just, they think it's like the funniest thing ever, and it's very much not. I laugh maybe 2 or 3 times times throughout this entire movie, but a lot of the jokes just did not really land for me much at all. So again, the screenplay is just not really that great here. Cinematography-wise, I don't really think this film delivers much on that either. I mean, the film's not horribly shot or anything. Like, it definitely is well filmed for the most part, but I will say the Zoom calls themselves, I mean, they just don't really stick out. I don't really think they're all that well filmed. It's very laggy and slow, and I mean, that's Zoom. That's the way it works, but it's not something that's conducive to an hour and 50-minute movie. You know, it's different with something like Host, where that entire movie is supposed to be one Zoom call, but when you have something like this, where half the movie is on Zoom calls, it doesn't really work. It feels very incoherent in that way, and I just don't think the cinematography is anything really that special here. There's a score. There definitely is a score that's here. It's not terrible or anything, and I think John Powell did an alright score for this movie. And the editing, this movie is way too long. It's almost 2 hours, and I really don't know why. Like I said, there's so many scenes that drag in this movie that amount to really nothing, and I just felt they could have been cut from the film entirely. Ultimately, Lockdown is not a terrible film. There are definitely a lot of things that could have worked about it. Hathaway and Ejiofor do what they can to elevate the material. There are some okay ideas in there, but it's a film that is so preoccupied by the COVID pandemic and also this heist plot that goes on that it just completely loses focus of what I think it really could have been. You really could remove the COVID element entirely, and I think this film would have turned out a lot better. Doug Liman's directing really isn't that bad, but it's the writing that really does hurt it. It's very subpar. It's not very funny, and overall, it just feels like another film that really just needed more time. I think they needed to do more with it. It needed another draft to really turn into something special, and as a result, it just ends up being a very forgettable romantic comedy that just really didn't leave much of an impact on me at all. And because of that, I am going to give Lockdown a C. Either way, guys, in my review of Lockdown, let me know what you guys saw of this movie. All of your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.